Is about to start. Thank you.
So yeah, so I mean, I think one of the big advantages again of the East Coast Greenway in the DC metro area in Northern Virginia is communities are very supportive of trails, and even for us, we designate 10-foot plus wide multi-use paths. We push for wider most of the time when we can. We also designate two-way cycle tracks with sidewalks. So there are sections, for instance, in the East Coast Greenway, if you've ever ridden the Metropolitan Branch Trail, where it kind of dumps you off in the kind of near First, I guess in First and M North, that would First and M Northeast, sidewalk, two-way cycle track that takes you to Union Station. That is signed as the East Coast Greenway. So we have a whole design guide. I'm not going to go too deep into that today, but we do have a whole design guide if you're very interested in sort of how we designate and how we view sort of design of the trail. As Alexis was saying, my background, I'm a social worker. I'm someone I used to work at Whitman Walker Clinic in DC. I worked as a bike messenger. I come out of kind of more the advocacy world. I'm not the sort of mapping planning specialist. So if you were looking to be dazzled by maps, I want to apologize now. I mean, I've got maps, but I'm not the most brilliant graphic design specialist. So my apologies. The colleague to the north, Daniel Pascal, who's the Mid-Atlantic manager who covers Philly, Delaware, and Maryland. He's from Loudoun County, so just outside, but very close to Fairfax, and grew up riding the WNOD. He is more the mapping specialist. So if we ever want to do a big mapping session, he's definitely the person. So, the way the organization works briefly, the East Coast Greenway Alliance is based in Durham, North Carolina, along the American Tobacco Trail. Staff like myself who work in the field, we are sort of positioned along the coast from northern New England all the way down to Florida. There's about 7 of us who are on the field staff currently. And then our main staff is in Durham, and that's kind of communication staff, development staff, our executive director and deputy director basically are in that Durham office. So I'm going to start away and take a look, and you can take a look at some maps. So this is what the East Coast Greenway looks like. It mainly stays to one route. There are some complementary routes, but the green is essentially what we call the spine route of the East Coast Greenway. You'll notice that in Virginia and Richmond, a complementary or coastal route breaks off going down the Virginia Capitol Trail towards Norfolk and Hampton Roads area, and kind of cuts down into North Carolina, right by the Great Dismal Swamp Trail, Canal Trail in Chesapeake. If you've never ridden down there, it's a fascinating place to ride. I would recommend it. Maybe not in the middle of the summer like I did last year, but it's definitely an interesting place to ride. So we have a spine route and a complementary route going all the way again from Calais, Maine to Key West, Florida. Virginia presents a lot of unique, I think, challenges and opportunities in terms of the East Coast Greenway. One of the sort of opportunities, right, is we have the 50+ mile Virginia Capitol Trail that is on our complementary route, not on the spine route. But we have, again, amazing trails sort of in the DC area, as well as a planned, I believe, 40+ mile trail network in Richmond, the Fall Line Trail, which although the ground officially hasn't broken on it, it's not, the Fall Line Trail is not an issue of if it's going to happen. It's more a question of when and kind of what order. We're going to have a pretty big trail network centered in Richmond with the Capitol Trail in the future, in the not so distant future. One thing you'll notice about our route in sort of the DC area is that Annapolis is on our route. We have 25 cities essentially that the Greenway, by our more or less charter, the East Coast Greenway has to go through. Annapolis is one of those cities. So a lot of folks look at the map, particularly if you're from the DC area, and say, oh, why doesn't it connect directly to Baltimore? That is a shorter gap. But Annapolis, being the capital of Maryland, a very important city historically, has been a big part of the East Coast Greenway from the beginning. And so we do go from DC to Annapolis. And before I jump deeper into sort of Virginia, it is really exciting that there's a section of the WBNA Trail on both sides of the Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County borders in Maryland. There's a bridge that's going to complete that connection, which will bring us this much closer to a sort of connected network, basically from the border of Fairfax County all the way up into DC, across into Maryland, and over to Annapolis. Plenty of work to do in Anne Arundel County as well. That's not an area I focus on. Again, I focus mainly on Virginia and DC. I do a little bit of work in Prince George's County just because it is so close to kind of where I live. And Daniel, as I said, the Mid-Atlantic person, is up in Philadelphia. That's where he's based. So this is sort of the Southeast map. Again, the interesting thing about the region we're in is we sort of get lumped into both the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast, but just to get a better sense of kind of the connections going south, which is honestly where a lot of folks that are using the long distance sort of East Coast Greenway Trail, what they want to do is they want to go to where the weather is warmer a lot of the time, particularly in sort of the spring and the fall. So as you can see, our route, really the spine route, continues on towards the Triangle area, and the coastal route from Norfolk heads down towards Wilmington. Doesn't go completely out onto the Outer Banks, but kind of hugs the area around there. All right, so this is a little bit closer up of the route in Virginia. The spine route in total, from the moment you cross the 14th Street Bridge until you get to past Clarksville, which is way down there in the southwest corner, is 283 miles. The complementary route is 139 miles. That is inclusive of the Jamestown Scotland Ferry, which takes you from Jamestown across to Surrey County, south of the James River, and that kind of starts getting you down towards the Southampton Roads region. Again, a lot of the blue in Virginia right now is on the Capitol Trail, as well as along the Mount Vernon Trail and around Fairfax County. So I'm really sort of happy that there is blue in sort of the Northern Virginia and the Fairfax County area. Plenty of work for me to do. My first year, I started last year with the Alliance, and my background is, as Lexa said, worked more on state bike advocacy. So I really spent a lot of the first 6 months just familiarizing myself with Virginia, and with the kind of ongoing, well, just right when I started was the kind of ongoing state trails budget conversation and push for a state trails office. So I spent a lot of time in this first, say, 3 to 6 months working on sort of more broader state issues. This is our sort of map locally, coming out of DC and through Fairfax County. The one little section in blue down there, as folks know, that's the Mount Vernon Highway Memorial Trail that is currently being worked on. We do not, on our actual map, which is map.greenway.org, we don't necessarily link to connecting trails on our exact map. We are looking to expand so that when folks actually open up to our map, they see more of the connector trails, similar to, say, how the Capitol Trails Coalition, how their map links in and shows kind of the whole ecosystem network, and that'll come up on the next slide. Just to get a sense of kind of where our route goes, this is the kind of direct route down Mount Vernon Trail, then across towards Route 1 through Lorton, and then crossing the Occoquan. Just mentioning crossing the Occoquan, again, another sort of thing I did in the first 6 months of the job, first year of the job, was get to know the folks in Prince William County. There's a pretty big push on their side of the river, of the Occoquan, and other side of the county line for a trails network. A lot of some folks may be more familiar with it, but a lot of the effort is out sort of Manassas Park. Obviously, my interest is a little bit more closer to the Potomac. But I was pretty ignorant, I have to admit, of Prince William County and sort of the politics. So it's taken me some time to learn. Growing up in DC, my family, we knew a lot of people in Fairfax County. Some of our closest friends growing up actually were down by Fort Hunt. So I spent a lot of time out there growing up. I did not know, my knowledge of Prince William County has increased about 100-fold in the last, say, 6 months to a year. So a big part of this position and looking at sort of connectivity to the East Coast Greenway, even the sort of the Fairfax side of the East Coast Greenway, is how do we increase access from Prince William County and from the communities that are so close to getting to the great trail network that exists in Fairfax, going kind of north and west. So this is the Capitol Trails Coalition map, again, that folks are very familiar with. a big goal of my sort of East Coast Greenway work in Fairfax County and in Northern Virginia is being able to highlight and continue to help build out the connections towards our route. And again, that can be on the Prince William side, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in Fairfax County to kind of create loops or create kind of, and Kevin O'Brien, who's with WABA, previously with Capital Trails Coalition, who I think just joined the call, has been talking about this, and I've been sort of following his lead on it as he's a bit more of an expert on the central and maybe northern Fairfax County trails. But the potential of just creating these really amazing kind of loops and sort of connected networks of trail within the county, it's pretty phenomenal. Just thinking about the mileage that can exist with a couple relatively small or short segments of trail. And that, part of my role, I cover a pretty big ground in terms of covering the whole state. And obviously doing a lot of work in DC, or doing some work in DC as well. But my goal and role really is to support advocates on the ground who are trying to build out trail network that can connect into the East Coast Greenway, knowing that a lot of folks are going to want to take a day trip or an overnight trip going north or going south, and they're looking for that connectivity to their neighborhood, to their part of the county, so that they don't have to get in their car to say do an overnight bike trip, or spend all day with their kids or grandkids, or what have you, to go on a day-long bike trip as well. As I've mentioned, this is really sort of the key project happening right now in Fairfax County. Full disclosure, I started late enough that I did nothing to push for this. I think my previous colleague, Sarah Sanford, who I don't think she slept much because she had Virginia and North Carolina under her purview. East Coast Greenway Alliance split those positions off. She was based in the Durham office. So I don't think she made it up to Northern Virginia all that much, but my role kind of in DC and then in Virginia is relatively new. So I know she worked on this a little bit and was in touch with Fairfax County about it, and then I sort of found out about it as I started last year. But it's sounds like it's on the way to being finished. I know full credit to Wash Cycle, the Twitter account, for some pictures. I have not been out there that direction in about 6 months, so I need to go back out at some point soon. It sounds like there'll be an opening this spring, so that's again a pretty big deal for us. And I've already been in touch with the folks at Fairfax County about making sure that the East Coast Greenway is sort of a part of whatever kind of ribbon cutting or opening they have, and trying to get some signage as well. That's always a big challenge, is getting East Coast Greenway signage, which is also a big part of my job, is to try to get signage along our route. Obviously, a significant portion of people, doing long distance bike touring or even sort of overnight trips or day trips have phones, or they've got, Strava, or, ride with GPS, etc. But really the goal of the East Coast Greenway and having it signed is that you don't have to have this, right, per se, or you can just hop on the route, follow it, and it goes where it goes, and you don't have to, you don't have to be a map wizard or a technology sort of focused person to be able to use the East Coast Greenway, even for an overnight trip. You just follow the signs, that are on the logo. It'll tell you where to go. A lot of my focus on the first year of my position has been, as I said, with the state level, with Virginia Trails Alliance and a number of other kind of Virginia Bicycle Federation, a couple other sort of state organizations, and a lot of that was on the trails, sort of trails budget and trails office, which is being created. And then again, been in a lot of contact with friends of the Mount Vernon Trail, was able to attend the 50th anniversary of the Mount Vernon Trail, met with them there, and then also took part in the Virginia Recreational Trail Summit. So I've spent a lot of time, I guess you could say, statewide and sort of regionally, and with some folks specifically focused on the Mount Vernon Trail. But really, this is my sort of first interaction directly with sort of Fairfax County constituents, folks from Fairfax County that might be using the East Coast Greenway regularly, daily, weekly, what have you. So a big part of this was just wanting to hear from folks and wanting to hear what questions they might have, and certainly share my information there. That's my work email, that's my cell phone. Obviously, please reach out if you have any questions. I didn't go too in depth about sort of the work I do with CTC and some of the other things that are part of my kind of day-to-day work plan. But know that certainly my work with sort of Capital Trails Coalition, with Kevin O'Brien, some other folks, a big part of that work is how do we connect Fairfax County and the sort of East Coast Greenway there with the rest of the region. And again, we are an organization that routinely kind of supports, I guess you could say, the sort of local advocates, local trail builders on kind of any number of issues, whether it's actual building trail maintenance, signage, those sorts of things. So really look forward to working with all of you. And I know I'm coming up on time, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. I have a few questions, and there's a couple questions in chat. I'm going to kind of combine my question with Yvette's question, because that was the first thing I wrote down. There was one of your first images in your slides showed how some of the trails are off-road. It said off-road and on-road.
I'll back it up. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, so Yvette asks if is the East Coast Greenway a combination of trails and roadways, or all trail?
Right.
And then my question related to that was, can you describe what does on-road and off-road mean?
Right.
And if it's on-road, are there like bike markings, or is it protected in any way? Those sorts of things.
So unfortunately, no, not protected in any way. I mean, there are some sections of the East Coast Greenway that are what we would call interim on-road route that do have bike lanes, et cetera. But some sections do not. So when it says complete and in progress, that means it's either currently or is in planning and construction to be 10-foot plus wide multi-use path, completely separated from traffic. And the goal is to create a 3,000-mile trail that's completely separated from traffic. So the end goal is that you cross roadways, but you're never actually on a roadway. You're pretty much on a multi-use trail the entire time. So yeah, the incomplete sections in red are an interesting mix of even on the same roadway. For instance, Iron Bridge Road south of Richmond. When you're in the city of Richmond, Iron Bridge has a bike lane. It's not a protected bike lane, but it's a bike lane. You enter Chesterfield County, you actually cross, I believe it's Chippenham Parkway, and that bike lane goes away. Now there's a trail nearby there, but that trail actually dead ends. So it'll be future Greenway, but it's not currently the East Coast Greenway now, or it has the potential of being the East Coast Greenway. And this is sort of I guess you could say, the planning challenge of working with numerous jurisdictions in the state to see where their planned trails kind of can link together, and looking for the lowest stress level bike and pedestrian connections between those trails that exist right now. So for instance, there's this actually comes up in the Occoquan area right across the county border in Prince William, where we're trying to get folks from the little old town of Occoquan down towards the trails that are, I guess you'd say, east of 95 and east of Route 1. I forget what that little kind of bulb out is called, but there are trails there. There's an old golf course that's been let go, and there's some trails in that area. Our route currently goes down a section that does not have sidewalks, but it's comfortable to ride a bike on. There is a state route with 2 lanes in each direction with a sidewalk, but it's completely uncomfortable for people to bike on. So we keep our route on even though there's an incomplete sidewalk, we're going to have the bike route on a route that is significantly more comfortable. I mean, not a 4-lane sort of, 50 to 60 mile, basically, unofficial 60-mile arterial road where people are driving really, really fast. So we have a lot of challenges around sort of interim on-road routes, because to be frank, there are just some places where it's impossible to avoid Route 1. And those are the areas that if you actually go to our map, it's a living, breathing document because it's a GIS document, map.greenway.org. I should have put that more highlighted that more should have highlighted it more. We do put warning signs kind of near, or little warning bulbs near sections of the on-road route that are in particular challenging because of, say, narrow shoulders and things like that. And those are a lot of those sections are also sections that are on Adventure Cycling's Bicycle Route 1, their map. In a lot of those non-trail sections that go along sort of, again, in central Virginia, mainly Route 1, that's mainly the stuff that's also on Adventure Cycling's map. And again, they're challenging sections that we try to highlight and say this is going to be a difficult time. There are people that skip certain sections of the Greenway when they ride it. US 17 between Beaufort, South Carolina and Savannah, Georgia is notably a challenging place. I grew up in DC. My parents retired right there, kind of near Bluffton. So I ride around there all the time, and it's very challenging. It's worse in some ways than Route 1 is in Central Virginia in terms of just challenging places. So again, a lot of work to do on the incomplete side of things. But again, I think the one big, again, with the Fall Line Trail and some of these other kind of regional trail networks that are starting to pop up, that long line between Petersburg going towards sort of the southern side of the state, there's a potential of high-speed rail connecting Petersburg to Raleigh, and again, this might be many years down the road. But that there is a plan of rail with trail with that high-speed rail that could connect basically Petersburg to almost the state line, which would be a huge chunk. So sometimes things get bit off in really small chunks, a mile here, 2 miles there, like with the Mount Vernon Memorial Highway Trail project. And sometimes it's 40 miles planned out. And just it takes time to build it. So a lot of work to do. I think Virginia, unfortunately, if you look at percentage of what we're trying to do and what's actually on the ground, I think we're maybe sort of second to the bottom. But we also have, I think, more sort of spine and we have more mileage in Virginia than most other states have because of the complementary route.
Yeah, when you first started talking, I definitely identified with your comment on the politics of learning, spending a year just learning one county's politics and all the ins and outs. I've lived in Fairfax County over 20 years, and I feel like it took me 10 years to really learn who to go to for what. And it takes so long, and it's challenging to find the right stakeholders and champions who will help implement these important connections, whether they're a mile or 40 miles. How many miles would you say here in Virginia are in the incomplete, in the red category?
I think we're somewhere in the sort of the 4/5 incomplete, I believe, because it's a total of we're over 400 miles, and I think we're at sort of the fifth. I mean, it's in little bits and pieces, and it's growing bit by bit, but I think we're still sort of 4/5 incomplete, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But again, sorry, let me do that. Oh, back it up real quick. There we go. Again, the Capitol Trail, I think, has a huge potential as a long distance trail that people want to visit. Folks fly into the Richmond airport to ride the Capitol Trail and go down to Williamsburg. And so I think the nice thing is I think that is essentially, it was at least partially a VDOT project and at least partially VDOT maintained. And the State Trails Office, what gives me hope, I'll say, is that the State Trails Office that's being developed, the state trail funding that's coming around, I think we are in a good place in Virginia in terms of having a lot of resources coming sort of down the pipeline, if you will, more so than there were 5 years ago. And that's, again, and I think there are obviously like regional rivalries and challenges relative to state funding, and I'm not going to get too deep into that. But I think having a strong Capitol Trails Coalition, having someone like Kevin working at WABA, working in Virginia, he and I went down to the Capitol, went down to Richmond a couple weeks ago and kind of met with some of the state, sort of statewide folks and state lawmakers and others. And honestly, Fairfax County has, at the state level, the delegates and senators. I mean, pretty much every time I hear, a great thing about a trail from the state senator, state delegate, I look it up and it's someone from Fairfax County. That's kind of been one of the kind of more, it's not a surprising thing, but it's been a kind of a sort of a pleasant thing to hear, is every time I hear something positive about trails or a desire to have kind of long distance connected trails. Wouldn't it be great if we could ride our bikes from basically Northern Virginia down to Richmond. It's like,
Mhm.
that I forget who said that exactly, but it was someone last year from, it was a delegate or senator from Fairfax County in a statewide trail meeting last session. So
Yeah,
there are folks talking about it, no doubt.
I hope they get the tourist dollar attraction message. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I've already traveled to Richmond and spent a weekend there just to ride the Capitol Trail, just to have a fun day out on the trail. And it was such a great experience. And, I would spend more long weekends in different parts of Virginia, riding 40, 50 miles and spending my money at local restaurants and at local hotels. And
Right.
so I hope they get that message.
They do. I would say a big challenge really, and I'll say this last thing I'll say about state politics is that I think there is that a little bit of that challenge of the sort of the east side of the Blue Ridge versus the west side of the Blue Ridge. And I think a lot of the communities on the west side of the Blue Ridge are kind of gunning for a lot of whether it's Shenandoah Valley Rail Trail or sort of the Roanoke area. A lot of those places, tourism, sort of outdoor tourism is becoming kind of their calling card. And so I think the emphasis in Northern Virginia on tourism, folks visiting the DC area, but wanting the outdoor aspect, not just of joyriding, but also of traveling, right? If someone's staying in Crystal City or someone's staying in Alexandria, but they want to visit DC, why not take the Mount Vernon Trail? Obviously, if they take Metro, that's great too, but why not get on a bike share bike and take the Mount Vernon Trail? And that to me is even more value added if you can talk, talking about that sort of mixture of, because obviously, DC doesn't, we're never going to have George Washington National Forest out our backyard for people to go mountain biking, but that's a different tourism angle. I think there's a whole nother outdoor tourism that's more about sort of linear parks and placemaking and those sorts of things that I think Fairfax and Northern Virginia are really well positioned at. So
definitely. Well, I want to invite people who are on the call to enter questions into chat, or if you want to come off mute or raise your hand, you can speak your question. We have Jeff in the chat has asked about what are some of the challenges in Prince William County that you've encountered?
Well, I'd say the first thing is, a geographic challenge, which is that our route really is sort of staying to the east of Route 1 and east of 95. And that's partially to take advantage of the fact that you've got parkland and whether it's county park or I'm blanking on some of the other sort of different jurisdictional parks, but you've got parkland, you've got water, the Potomac and the Occoquan, et cetera. And so that's where people are going to want to go in some senses in terms of building trail to ride or to run or to hike. But of course, you're dealing with creek crossings, railroad tracks, and then you've got further south, you've obviously got Quantico. And so thinking about sort of long-term, long distance trail planning in the county, those are sort of the geographic challenges. I think Prince William, the sort of county, the advocates organizing themselves more in the last, say, year or two, is dealing with one of the challenges they had, which they weren't as well organized, and kind of engaging more with the Capitol Trails Coalition will be huge. They're a part of the COG. Prince William County is a part of the sort of the MW COG and things like that. But the Capitol Trails Coalition, they're not a part of that yet. I think they will be soon, hopefully, knock on wood. And so I think them being kind of brought into that Capitol Trails Coalition and sort of into that regional kind of trail network is really a good thing and will help a lot. I mean, and this is, I would say a lot of the focus when I've been involved with Prince William Trails folks has been a little bit further up towards Manassas and Manassas Park, where some of the concentrations of population are up there. And it seems like there's huge needs. So I wouldn't say that that's a bad thing overall, but I think it's a challenge when I'm thinking about sort of how do you build further south? So.
Yvette asked how do you work through the branding across the East Coast Greenway, the Capitol Trails Coalition, the local trail names like Mount Vernon Trail?
Yeah, it is sort of a difficult. I mean, we try to lead with signage, and that on the Mount Vernon Trail in particular is difficult because it's an NPS property, and so they are very protective around signage. So for us, a lot of it's trying to have dual signage, so folks that are on the trail themselves actually can see kind of where they are and kind of build an understanding and awareness of it. I think we try to, particularly when it comes to trail development, we try to take a little bit more of a back seat because we really want folks that are local and are kind of deeply embedded in communities to kind of like lead the way. So sometimes what that means is that we try to have some, again, value added when it comes to sort of trail development, and try to kind of we're not always the convener. We're a lot of times sort of bringing in another element or multiple elements in a way. From a and yeah, it's a challenging question overall, because I think sometimes in some places folks are incredibly aware of the East Coast Greenway, and in some places they're not. So I guess the short answer, the long answer is it's a challenge, and it's something I kind of think about most days, is how do we increase understanding of what that is. But with something like a ribbon cutting with the Mount Vernon Trail Memorial Trail, something like that, we try to use that to kind of raise kind of broader awareness, not steal thunder from the Mount Vernon Trail, not steal thunder from sort of the local advocates as well, but kind of bring something else to the table.
Definitely. Yeah, you mentioned in your presentation the importance of signage, and so folks who are not necessarily in the digital world, or when you're biking, you don't want to stop and look at your phone all the time to figure out where you're going. So that's super important to have that on the ground signage. But counter to that, like what I think about my experience on the Capitol Trail between Richmond and Williamsburg, they had a really great online interactive experience where, like, mile by mile, you could see where there's bathrooms, where there's water, where there's hotel, where there's food, and kind of have a mental, like, okay, like I can go this 10 miles and I'll have a place to stop. So whether it's, the Mount Vernon Trail or some other trail that's part of the Greenway, I think having both of those tools working together really makes that great experience.
And we're working on some sort of state maps that have a lot of that information on it. It's tough because there is a whole world of like bike touring planners that are kind of, quasi concierge kind of service type folks. And they work with local, hotels and things like that to kind of build out these sorts of plans and networks. And so a lot of times it's tough because we don't want to show preferential treatment towards, say, one restaurant versus another, one business versus another when it comes to long distance travel. But I think we are working on sort of how to add that to our map. And it usually will be state by state, maybe not the whole thing all at once, because that's a lot of data in one spot. But trying to build that out so that there is a little bit, because again, I think what we're hearing is there's more of a desire for like overnight bike travel, 1 or 2 night bike travel. A lot of people are sort of getting into bike touring or bike packing or bike camping, but they're not necessarily like at a point in their life where they can drop everything and ride, or as someone did, unicycle the whole. A guy just finished unicycling the whole thing the other day, so about a couple weeks ago. So not everyone has the time to do that, right? Some people are just going to want to do a day or two. And again, something like the Capitol Trail is a great, out and back, stay in Richmond or stay in Jamestown, either one. But we have a lot. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of helping provide like a lot more of that. And then someone brought up a question of access points, and I think I was mentioning that a little bit earlier. I think that's one of the challenges. We need to work more on showing the sort of the safe connections, whether it's and there's a lot of ways we can color code that using in GIS, whether it's like a trail connection, a bike lane connection, a sidewalk connection, a cycle track or protected bike lane connection. I think there's a lot of ways we can do that. So Clark, I see that, and I think that's something that we should be working on, and hopefully we'll be working on in the future. Again, it's tough because the map.greenway.org, that main map, is really the like primary route map, and we almost want to leave that sort of a little bit separate because it's a constant updating of our specific route. But I think there are complementary maps we could work on that both have services that Alexis was talking about, but also kind of access points. I think, unfortunately, to be honest, I think a big challenge is the model around bike touring has often been a little bit more, and again, this is me speaking as myself, not for the Alliance, but the model has always been very like self-sufficient. And I think ultimately we have a lot of data on these things. There are a lot of ways to use these phones efficiently. But I think we want to be a more kind of open and engaging kind of trail network and map and organization, because a lot of folks getting into bike touring or bike camping, they want to do overnight trips or even just a day trip. They're not necessarily folks that have, years and years of experience doing XYZ on a bike. And so for us, we're trying to make the actual infrastructure as user friendly as possible for people walking or biking or in a wheelchair, what have you. But we also need to make kind of some of that the other aspects of that, I think, a little bit more intentionally accessible. And I think having access points and having more things about, again, bathrooms, places to get water, et cetera, is kind of an important aspect of that. One thing I do want to make clear is that pretty much the whole thing, that once it is an actual trail, it is also ADA accessible. That's a pretty important part of our route. And so there are sections like in Prince William County, I think, where there are either grades or stairs along some trail sections that we have to kind of mark out and have kind of wraparound or route arounds. Because again, whether it's with slope or with stairs, they need to be ADA. So if there's no ramp, then we have to kind of have a re-ramp around.
Yeah, very important, not just for people with different abilities, but folks riding with kids, folks riding with elderly, every all ages and abilities, of course.
Right. Yeah, not everyone can live. If someone's got a trailer or a electric bike that has kids on the back, you can't just lift that downstairs or lift that upstairs, depending on kind of what the situation is. So
definitely. Well, some other comments in the chat. Thanks, Kevin, for the report that Greater Prince William Trails Coalition has now officially joined the CTC. That's great news. And Clark has another question. Copy of the slides.
For sure.
We'll make those available.
Absolutely.
And we can put this recording on FABB's YouTube channel as well. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Would anyone like to come off mute and ask a question or have a comment? Going once?
Well, I'm gonna throw map.greenway.org in the chat just so folks have the link. And then again, obviously greenway.org is the actual website. If folks are looking for kind of more information about just other states, other places. I mean, folks may have relatives in other states or places they visit regularly. I will say we are talking about doing some kind of me and Daniel, my colleague in Philly, the Mid-Atlantic coordinator, we've talked about kind of doing a sort of a DC area up towards Baltimore, kind of through Annapolis ride once the bridge over the Patuxent is done. So that'll probably be next year. But if folks are interested in that sort of kind of test riding out sort of sections we would probably start in Virginia, maybe in Alexandria, or maybe further south in Fairfax, maybe start Mount Vernon, and head all the way up. So definitely something to think about in the future for sort of more day trip, overnight trip, long distance travel. And there is one little section in sort of Greenbelt that we need to deal with in terms of the kind of connecting the Anacostia Trail to the WBNA Trail, but that's for me and Daniel to work on, not for Fairfax County to worry about necessarily. So
for sure. But yeah, please include FABB. We'd love to be a part of that if you want to start in the Fairfax area of the Mount Vernon Trail. The Bellhaven area is a great starting point. Good restrooms, parking, water, all that good stuff. All right.
I do have a comment. This is Yvette. I want to say that I'm excited about the trail. The entire thing, I found out about it when I was in Richmond, actually, and I saw the signage there. So that's how I knew about it. So the signage does work. And I do a lot of bike touring for vacation. So having those connections there and being able to spend a few nights and spend dollars, I think is super important. These are things that Alexis mentioned. So, so good to hear about the progress.
Thanks, Matt.
I see Kevin has a hand raised. Would you like to ask your question or comment?
Sure. I was just gonna just give a shout out, on behalf of WABA to what ECG does, in sort of the same way that some of our jurisdictional groups, right, like focus groups like FABB, sort of go to WABA for some like regional advice. we then go to groups like East Coast Greenway to provide, some of those like national and super regional, connections, advice, strategizing around various engagements. So yeah, I think it all works together, and I think at the end of the day, we're all swimming in the same direction, and it's great to have partners like Elliot and like East Coast Greenway, who really are showing what for us working on maybe a neighborhood street or a neighborhood trail, how this really builds up to something, can build up to something really incredible. This vision of a 3,000 mile route all the way from Florida to Maine. So just wanted to shout out. WABA has lots of love for East Coast Greenway. WABA has lots of love for FABB as well.
Thanks, Kevin.
And I'll say the last thing I put in the chat was just we sort of started a campaign earlier this year called Greenways for All, and we focus on the East Coast, but we kind of consider ourselves a national organization, and really pushing for funding to kind of complete greenways that are desired across the country, and certainly along the East Coast along our route, but really putting funding at a national, sort of at a federal level, to create to really just complete all that's out there, right? There's a lot of estimates on what it would take to finish the East Coast Greenway, or finish every there's the cat I was telling you about, to finish basically every trail, say in the DC area, DC metro area. There's a lot of different estimates, but what we know is that you get a lot of bang for your buck when you spend money on trails, and so we really should complete what we have out there. So Greenways for All, if you're interested in sort of bigger picture, sort of national campaign, and really focusing on getting the kind of commitments we may not have a chance to get in the future in terms of funding for kind of big picture projects. And we do work a lot with Rails to Trails Conservancy, absolutely, particularly with Capital Trails Coalition, because they kind of are the sort of the linchpin of that organization, helped really start it. But we sort of operate obviously in different ways. And I'd say one of the biggest things about Rails to Trails that's kind of fascinating or interesting for us is that their Great America Rail Trail, which is really the only trail that they sort of own in a similar way that we own sort of our route, they cross at the mall. They cross basically right there at on the mall, sort of between, so around 15th and the mall, so right by the two-way protected bike lane on 15th Street. So we're going to be working with National Park Service and Rails to Trails. We're trying to create some kind of kiosk that shows the sort of importance of these two basically national trail networks that kind of meet right there in DC. So yeah, they are regular partners of ours. Actually, one of my close friends works in the donor side of RTC, but he grew up in Fairfax County, I believe, grew up riding the WNOD. It seems like it's a common thing for people that I know that work in bikes and trails and stuff, as they all grew up in Fairfax and they all grew up loving the WNOD. So yeah, we work with RTC. I mean, I'm talking to people from them almost daily, if not certainly weekly. So
awesome. Well, if someone can interrupt me if they have another question, comment, but I want to thank you, Elliot, for filling us in on all the great work that you're doing in Virginia and DC, and we'll continue to help partner with you as FABB to make it happen and make those great off-road trail connections come together. I will give a last little plug for FABB. You can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Whether you have a question about a local route or something going on in your neighborhood, we have advocates all across the county who can help you connect with whatever issue or question you might have. And I hope folks will reach out and volunteer with us at Bike to Work Day coming up, and that you'll join us on some rides coming up too. So last chance for any alibis or questions or comments. All right. Well, I wish everyone a great evening. Thank you so much again, Elliot, and for all of you for joining us tonight. And we'll see you out there, hopefully.